to my next collection of unusual openings from the Tata Steel Chess Tournament, and this entire collection of openings is brought to us courtesy of Baskaran Adhiban, young Indian grandmaster. He had an incredible performance in Tata Steel, and if we look at the top 100 and find Adiban, his rating is now up to 2682. He came into the tournament rated about 2656, and probably the lowest rated player in the tournament, in the entire tournament. And he finished third place in the tournament. Was actually challenging for like the top spots in the tournament. One of the games that we'll see today, you'll see that he was able to, that this guy who was basically, so he qualified into this tournament by winning the Tata Steel Challengers group last year. So this guy, I mean, he's known to professional chess players. He wouldn't be known to like people off the street the way Magnus Carlsen might be. I mean, this guy was about number 100 in the world, and he showed that he could compete with Carlsen and, So, Karyakin, like all kinds of amazing players. So he was like a big revelation at the tournament. And as you see, when we look at a couple of his games, I mean, he could potentially have even scored maybe half a point or so more, possibly. So, yeah, he was like a really, really big story at Tata Steel. There were a few really big stories at Tata Steel. There was Wesley So winning the tournament, big deal. Because people were wondering if he was better than Carlsen or not after his recent good results, and he went into the tournament and led basically all the way through after a couple rounds. And then the next story was Wely, the Chinese prodigy, having also a pretty good breakthrough performance, up to like second place going to the last round, and then he lost in the last round, but he was competing for like, first place in a super tournament. And then finally like Adiban, with his third place finish, and just overall fantastic chess play. And one of the things that was really distinguishing about Adiban's chess play is that he was playing like all kinds of new openings, and not even like the same opening every game. So in my mind, he even outdid Richard Rapport for original and weird openings. And even when he wasn't playing like original or weird openings, he played a great game that I'm not even going to show today against Sergei Karyakin, the world championship challenger, who's not the best player in the world, despite that, nor the second best player in the world, in which he just crushed him with black in the French defense, and he said it was the first time he'd ever played the French defense. So, I mean, the French defense, I'm not showing it to you today because it was actually a very classical variation, something that Karyakin's probably seen a million times, and not an unusual opening. But, I mean, he was just playing fantastically in just like one opening after the next. So, with all that said, let us get into Adiban's games. Analysis board for anyone. Start. Put in our PGN. So this game, Adiban is white and Van Wely is black. And my goal in looking at these things is really to evaluate the opening, to try and like look at some openings that we don't often see and try and evaluate who got a good or bad position and why that might be and what we think of that opening. If it's something worth trying out or not worth trying out, etc. How good or bad are these openings that we don't see as much? So he starts off the tournament with the c3-Sicilian, which is quite a rare bird, as they say, at the top levels. Those of you who follow top-level GM chess know that anything that isn't like the Ruy Lopez is like an unusual e4 opening almost. Or the Ruy Lopez or the Najdorf, right? And in the d4 openings, there's a variety of defenses black plays. But in the e4 openings, you get a lot of the same stuff. Dayon, it's hard to say. Very often after someone surges, they then have a bad result. Last year at the Challengers, Adiban played really well, gained a bunch of points, and also looked like he would soon be 2700. I mean, the kind of player who can win the challenger section of Tata Steel is usually a 2700 level player. And then over the rest of the year, he ended up losing a few points and coming back down to about number 100 in the world. So, maybe there's something about playing in Wijk aan Zee that agrees with him, or being in the Netherlands or something, and he won't play quite as well elsewhere. You can never really judge from one great tournament. So, having not watched any of his tournaments other than the 2 Tata Steel tournaments, I don't have any professional opinion whether his level is that good otherwise. Certainly this tournament should have given him a lot of confidence, and that can be helpful. Okay, so we've got a c3-Sicilian, and often black plays knight f6 first and then tries to bring the bishop out to g4. Van Wely plays more calmly with e6, so he's not spending time early in the opening trying to bring the bishop out. That's a little bit more conservative, means he's less likely to fall into any tactical dangers on this diagonal, and means that eventually he's happy to just develop his bishop to b7 instead of g4, which should also be a perfectly good diagonal. So so knight a3 here. This is a move that often gets played in c3-Sicilians now. It used to be people would play like bishop e3 and try and threaten d takes c5. And then, the idea was that ultimately we're freeing up the c3 square for this knight. And the other thing I've seen people sometimes do is, play some version where they go c4 at some point and then, bring the knight to c3 as well. So, but people have been playing knight a3 in this opening for a while, and it has the idea of going to either b5 or c4 or playing bishop c4 even. So, yeah. So queen d8 is played. This definitely gets out of the way of like a quick knight to b5. So now Adiban simply develops the knight to c4. If black takes on d4, we have to ask ourselves if Adiban was planning to recapture with a piece or a pawn, because that makes a huge, huge difference. It might be equally good to take back with a piece or a pawn, or it might be better or worse, but it's definitely a very, very different style of game and different structure. We can come back and look at what would happen if black took on d4 at some point, but let's just see how the game developed. It seems to me like probably he's intending to take back with his c-pawn at this point if black takes on d4. And it's very interesting that black's not choosing to take on d4 at this point. Okay, so he's making use of the knight on c4 by coming into d6. That knight's super annoying. Looks like it's getting the bishop pair for white for sure, right? But some tactics come in. Yeah, his own bishop can't really evade the knight on h5 because it's defending the knight on d6. So it comes here, 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 here. Yeah. First instinct is that this d-pawn doesn't look that impressive. It looks a little bit out there on its own. I've seen some games with this pawn that have been pretty complicated. It's like a Fiddler Nakamura game or something last year with this pawn structure. Very similar position. Very complicated. Bishop b7. I might have one of the players wrong. Rook e1. Just for anyone wondering, you can't take the pawn on d6 because of bishop h7 check and then losing the queen. So the pawn's sort of barely defended for now. Bishop b7. Maybe... Yeah, so it's going to be hard for black to attack this with multiple pieces because knight e5 takes away the d7 square whenever if he ever tried to play queen d7, rook d8. I mean, he could play g6 at some point and make white spend a tempo on like bishop c2 or bishop b5, but that's not that bad a move for white. Other thing he can do is just try and block on d5 and then try and take this. So Okay, so to know if this was good or bad for white. I mean, one thing to just realize is that black can't do the cut it off approach because of c4. So it looks very hard to win this pawn. If black has no chance to win this pawn, then white has presumably a little bit of an advantage. Yeah, if black has no way to even threaten this pawn, then I guess white eventually has the advantage here. Because basically what I'm seeing is that the black rooks are a little bit limited and weak, and white's rooks will be better than black's pretty soon if black's not able to achieve anything. We got about another hour and a half, Piotr, for the show. Okay, a6. Yeah, black needs to get some space and keep that bishop from taking away his squares. Queen over the king side. Yeah, it seems like white has a generally nice position. Oh, someone suggested an interesting idea of knight to e8. Let's see. Is that good? I think it might not be, but let me just check what I'm thinking. Okay, here's what I was thinking. Queen e7. That's my answer, Farhan. And I think I've worked it out, and it's actually pretty annoying for black. With the knight on e8, you can't ever like capture here because you trap the rook. Meanwhile, the d6 pawn's defended, and queen b7 is threatened. Finally, you've got a threat of playing like knight to d7 or c6, depending how black responds, right? Like if rook to b8 or something, you actually bring the knight to d7. And if like bishop to c8, actually you don't even need to play the strong looking knight c6 because you can take here. Their back rank is so messed up by their minor pieces. a6. So a6 here, b5 here. Here, if knight to e8, white has d7. So queen d8 here, knight e8. Yeah. So interesting, this queen e7 idea. So king g7, a4. Now knight e8 might be possible, but it's going to cost... Is it going to cost a pawn? It might not. Knight e8 might be playable here. However, I'm going to say overall that this position was good for white at this point. It seems clear that black didn't really threaten to win this pawn. White has, freer piece play. They've got, sack ideas on f7. They've got play on the king side. And I know that Adiban eventually, showed an advantage this game. Right? Getting this pair of passed pawns. And he eventually drew a pawn up endgame that was, really tough. But certainly he got a good position here. So let's go back a little bit and see if black has anything good to do about this position or if this position is good for white. Before it starts to become clear that it's a good position for white. So bishop b7. Okay, what kind of approach can black take to really trying to get this? Here. These moves all made like 100% sense to me. Up to this point. Okay, so now let's see if I can't do something better with like knight e4 or something. Knight e4. Knight c6. If black takes, then they lose to bishop takes c6. But they can play queen d6. Rook e4. Now the queen's hanging and they can't get this back, can they? Let's see here. Or queen c7 actually is better because now on rook c8, there's always knight e7. So hang on, let's play queen e7 for black now. Okay, we can also look at a6 on this move here instead of queen c8. But this line here is also kind of funky, this whole knight e4 idea. It looks like that knight is pretty much trapped, doesn't it? I don't see a way out for this knight. Okay. So that is interesting. So we definitely need to figure out what to do about this move. Knight e4. I mean, another alternative is to go into the d7 square or to just push the d pawn another step. What if we play knights? Oh, that's what we tried. We tried knight c6, queen d6. d6. Knight d6, knight c6, queen d6. Doesn't quite work. Okay. So basically my options are to play d7 or knight to d7, I think. And let's try d7. I mean, knight d7. Now I play f3. Now, if the knight comes back to f6, white can trade and take on e8, right? So I think here black needs to try for complications with a6. Okay, this move is cool because my idea is here, 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 and then the knight can come out on c5. Whereas if I play here, here, I don't really have the greatest move. I have to come to e5. Might still be okay for white, but let's try bishop a4. Now b5 definitely, I think this position fails big time. So options here. Knight f6 still loses. I'm going to assume that knight d6 also loses after queen d6, and you can play rook d1 and defend that knight. So there's like knight to g5, or bishop c8 is definitely going to lose here. Attacking that, among other things. And it can't be good, really. Bishop c8 is too discoordinated. Okay, I think this is good for white. I think this is why black doesn't play knight e4. So it looks like knight e4 is not a great option. So now let's look at Farhan's suggestion of playing a6 here. And now hopefully we'll find out what was going on here. Well, first thought, let's try knight c6. Black has to take it because any queen move allows knight e7 check. Excuse me. So, yeah, wherever the queen goes, knight e7 would win the queen. So it's got to be trade, trade. And now not rook to c8, probably because of this move. So let's say rook to a7. So now my big question is whether the bishop's better than the knight. I think it might be. So queen f3, queen takes d6 didn't look good to me, so I'm going to try this move here first. And my goal was to get this pawn defended in extra time, and then it's not clear what will happen. Look, black's all over this pawn now, huh? It looks like the pawn's a goner. Because black can also play the move. Black can play either knight to e8 or knight d5 at some point here. You know, as well as queen to b8 or b6, etc. Yeah, that pawn looks dead to me. What do you guys think? I think that's it for white. So that didn't work out. So then other option is to save the bishop in this direction. Let's say again black goes after d6 and we go here and here. What kind of resources does white have here to keep that pawn? Still looks pretty dead, right? Interesting. Interesting. Maybe we need to keep our bishop on that square. Let's see if that's possible. Hang on. Queen c8. Maybe what we need to do now is play queen f3 so we don't give the opponent d7 for that other rook. This is precarious, right? And I know I just wasted a tempo coming here, but that was my only way to do it because this was hanging before. Let's see if I can keep the bishop here and keep my opponent's rooks from coordinating, right? Because now, you know, black still needs another... Oh, and this knight's hanging in some cases. So, like, if they play queen b8 here, going after the pawn, now I can take this because my bishop's not attacked. So here, black still has some coordinating to do to deal with this pawn. And as long as the bishop's here, I do have the move d7 in some cases, huh? Like 98. White will probably just cash in an exchange here. With an advantageous position for white. Well, a winning position. So black could also hang out with king g7. And now it's really hard to challenge this bishop. Play c4, just dealing with knight d5 and b5 moves, and then rook d2, etc. Oh, here there's queen b8. Yep, sorry. Gotta be careful about that. Let's play rook d2 first. I feel like this is good for white. Evis is suggesting playing g4.